Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I hope you're doing well. It's been a while since I've done a video about algae, but today we're going to talk about how you can prevent algae. If you're currently struggling with some algae issues, check out my entire algae playlist. In that playlist you'll find videos about pretty much every type of freshwater algae there is, BBA, staghorn, thread algae, blue-green algae, etc. etc. In those videos I explain step by step how you can identify, remove and prevent any algae. I'll leave a link on the top of the screen and in the video description. Now today I want to share with you 20 things that I do or don't do to prevent algae from appearing. Now I'm not saying that all of my aquariums are completely algae free, but these 20 things combined keep it to a very minimum. 20 things might sound like a lot, but don't get overwhelmed. A lot of these are passive or only need to be implemented at the beginning of a new setup. Let's get right into it. First up, the most basic thing, regular water changes. In pretty much all of my setups I change 50% of the water every week. I noticed that when I skip a week I immediately start seeing some algae on the glass, so that's why I prefer to do it every week. With every water change I will also clean the glass even if I don't see any algae. And if you think that's a lot of work to do every week, you probably need a better system. If you are still carrying buckets of water around with every water change, I suggest you check out my full maintenance video to see how easy I do my water changes. The next item is about when I do the water changes. So all my tanks have their photoperiod from 1 PM till 9 PM. And the CO2 usually starts at 12 and stops at 8. So I always try to do my water changes before that time, so in the morning, or after that, so later in the evening. The reason for that is I don't want to have too many fluctuations in the pH and the CO2 levels. Imagine it's the middle of the day, the tank lights are on full intensity, the water is saturated with CO2, the pH is nice and low, and the plants are happy. Then I come in and take out 50% of that good CO2 saturated soft water, and I replace it with water straight from the tap that has barely any CO2 in there and has a much higher pH. That creates a huge swing in the water parameters, and that's not what you want. Alright, moving on to point number 3. This is one I've talked about many times already. Whenever I set up a new aquascape, I use a lot of plants. Planting heavy from the start really increases your chances of success. In the beginning, it is very likely that you'll get some algae, but plants are the worst enemy to algae, so starting out with a lot of plants is the best thing you can do. Number 4. I use floating plants in the new setup. Floating plants sit on top of the water surface, so they have unlimited access to the CO2 that's in the air. This enables them to grow very fast, and fast growing plants are the worst enemy for algae. Next, I always make sure I have good flow in my tanks. First of all, good flow is important to keep the aquarium nice and clean. We don't want to have waste building up inside the aquarium. But good flow is also important to distribute all the nutrients and the CO2 mist to our plants. That's why I always recommend to use a filter that has a flow rate of at least 5 to 10 times the volume of the aquarium. Number 6 is probably my favorite. I always make sure I have an algae cleanup crew, especially in the beginning of a new setup. This just makes everything a lot easier. The 2 algae eaters everyone should have, in my opinion, are Otocinclus and Amano shrimp. Number 7. I always use some fast growing plants, especially in the beginning. At number 3 I mentioned that it is good to plant heavy from the start. But if you're only using slow growing plants like anubias, buses and crypts, you can use a lot of them, but chances are you will still run into some algae issues in the early stages. So I always suggest people to use some fast growing plants, and these plants will just soak up all the excess nutrients and keep algae at bay. Number 8 on the list of things I do to keep my tanks algae free is I use CO2 injection, and I make sure I inject enough by using a dropchecker. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe aquatic plant cells consist of about 40% carbon, so they need CO2 in order to grow and to perform photosynthesis. So in most of my tanks I inject CO2 and I use a dropchecker to make sure I'm injecting the right amount. We are staying on the subject of CO2, and number 9 is I always have my CO2 come on an hour or even 2 hours before the lights turn on. It's really important for plants to be able to start photosynthesizing as soon as the lights turn on. So we really want to have a good amount of CO2 available for them straight away. Okay, next, I focus on growing healthy plants. If you have an aquarium that's full of healthy plants, I'm sure you will not see a whole lot of algae. So I don't focus on, oh, how can I make sure I don't get algae? Instead, I just focus on growing healthy plants by providing them with enough light and enough nutrients. Number 11, I use a lean fertilization method. I personally don't like to have a lot of nutrients in the water column, because if there's plenty of nutrients available for plants, then there's also plenty available for algae. The good thing is that plants can take up nutrients to their roots and leaves, and algae do not have roots. So I rather keep a lot of nutrients in the substrate and very little in the water column. Number 12, I always stick to an 8-hour photoperiod. So basically all my tanks have the lights on from 1 PM till 9 PM. The reason for that is plants can only photosynthesize for a certain number of hours. Did you ever notice your plants closing up at the end of the day? That means they're done. So once they are done, there's no point of keeping the lights on. But of course we like to look at our tank with the lights on. So I always say 6 hours is the minimum and 10 hours is the maximum. So I'll stay in the middle with 8 hours. Next point, I always wait 2 to 3 weeks before I start dosing liquid fertilizer. So I always use Aquasoil in my aquariums, and depending on the brand, the soil will release a lot of nutrients in the first few weeks. That's why we have to do so many water changes in the beginning. And these nutrients are usually more than enough for the first few weeks, so there's no need to supplement it with liquid fertilizers. Especially not nitrate and phosphate. You can add some potassium and trace elements if you want, because plants use a lot of it and the soil doesn't release these nutrients. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about a method I sometimes use, which is called a Darkstart. As I mentioned, with Aquasoil you have to do a lot of water changes to get rid of all the nutrients released by the soil. This is a lot of work and a bit wasteful as well. So if you have the patience, you can perform a Darkstart. And what this means is you set up a new aquarium, you add your substrate and you build your hardscape until you're satisfied. Then you fill the aquarium with water and you install your filter. Then you just keep it running like that without any lights for 3 to 4 weeks. In that time the soil will release all its nutrients and the filter will get established with beneficial bacteria. After those 3 to 4 weeks you drain the aquarium completely, then you add your plants and you fill it back up. This method gives you a much better chance of a successful startup period without doing all those extra water changes. This method has a lot of other benefits as well, too many to talk about in this video. So let me know in the comments if you want me to make a separate video about this topic. Next up, I always try to keep the temperature in my tanks low. Did you ever notice that you have more algae issues in summer? That's because warm water has less oxygen, which is not good for the beneficial bacteria that live in your substrate and filter. In warm water, waste organics decompose a lot faster, which means more nitrate and ammonia, so the filter needs to work harder as well. That's why I always like to keep my tanks at about 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Number 16 is just one of those small things that can make a difference. So we already established that a large healthy plant mass defeats algae. So when I set up a new aquarium and it's been about 2 or 3 weeks, that's usually about the time when I will start getting some algae. But it's usually also the time for the first trimming session. In that case, I would rather not trim the plants and let the tank get a little bit more overgrown instead of doing that trimming session and removing a large quantity of healthy plant mass. But there is a fine line between a little overgrown to increase plant mass or completely overgrown and plants are suffering because there is no light coming through the surface. So you have to be careful with this one. Next up, after I trim plants, I also temporarily reduce liquid fertilizers. So if I just performed a large trimming session, I've removed a lot of plant mass. And plants always need a week or so to recover from being trimmed. So in that time, when I have less plant mass and plants are recovering, I will use less liquid fertilizers. Okay, 3 left. Number 18 is I make sure my tanks don't have any dead spots. A dead spot is a spot where there is no flow and the waste organics can build up and cause algae. This can be prevented by having a strong filter like we talked about in the beginning, but also by being aware of this when we create our hardscape, so we don't leave too many holes or cracks in between the rocks and wood. And if you do have some dead spots currently, then just make sure you pay attention to those areas when you are doing a water change. Next, I make sure I keep the water surface nice and clean. This counts for the oily surface layer, but also for plant trimmings. The oily surface layer prevents a good exchange between oxygen in the air and CO2 from the water, so it's always good to keep that surface layer to a minimum. And the best way to do this is with a skimmer. And a skimmer will also help to get rid of the plant trimmings. The last one for today, I use healthy plants and preferably in vitro. Now I think it's common sense that if you start a new aquarium with plants that are not looking healthy, your chances of success are already significantly reduced. So always try to get your hands on the best quality plants possible. If you buy them in a store, ask when a new shipment of plants is coming in, so you know when the fresh plants are arriving. If you buy them online, just make sure you're buying from a website that has a good reputation. And why I prefer in vitro plants is because these plants are produced under sterile conditions, so there's definitely no traces of algae on these plants. And in vitro plants just adapt faster to underwater conditions comparing to regular potted plants. That's 20. I'm pretty sure that if you implement some of these things, you will have very minimal algae issues. I hope you learned something new from this video, and if you did, make sure to click that like button. It's completely free, only takes a second, and it really helps me out. Share this video with anyone that needs to see this and is currently struggling with some algae issues. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.